placing a lollipop stick into the center of some PVC pipe and then filling it with some hot glue. After letting it dry, we can cut off most of the lollipop stick and then drill in a couple of holes. Now we have a replacement. A screen window is a must, especially during the summer. Unfortunately, this screen isn't super easy to install. We can make a plastic tab like this one to help. Simply lift up this rubber spline using a flathead screwdriver and put our tab underneath and push everything down into the slot. Now we can install our screen from the inside. This nozzle is cut a little too small to apply our sealant quickly. Let's modify the nozzle. First we'll melt the tip and seal it shut. Then we'll make a vertical incision along the nozzle. Now we can apply a much thicker layer faster. And once we're finished, we can seal everything up with a bit of duct tape. We don't want the raw wood to be exposed on our baseboards, so we'll cut everything to look a little bit more professional. We can cut clean 45-degree angles to the baseboard on both ends. Now we can line up the ends to form a neat angle. Tape the two ends together, then flip it over and add a piece of double-sided tape. This will keep our end piece secure. Sometimes we need a small foam brush to paint our projects. We can make one by hot gluing a pencil to a binder clip and then cutting off a piece of sponge for the brush head. Apply the paint like so. When finished, replace the old sponge with a new one. Here we're tying a prusik hitch, also known as a prusik knot. It's a rather useful knot because it's simple to tie and simple to untie. It stays secure under tension and it moves freely when not under tension. Besides being used in rock climbing, it's especially useful for tying rope to fixed posts. Now we're going to be joining these two beams together in a relatively simple way. We'll make some marks to match the width of the crossbeam and make another mark halfway deep. Next, we'll remove this section by making multiple cuts into the wood with a saw. Now we can break off the remaining clips. Then we can smooth out the bottom of our cut with either a miter saw like so, or simply by using a chisel. Now we'll use two screws to make our marks into both pieces of the wood to drill holes for dowels. We can use a pencil to make it easier to see the indents. Drill holes on the indents and install the dowels. Next, we'll add two more dowels into the corners, ensuring that the hole that we drill is angled. This is called a pocket hole. Fill the hole with glue and hammer in the dowels. Next, we'll saw off the ends of the dowels that are sticking out. Let's move on to our next project, which will be adding a depth stop to our hand saw. Start by cutting out a rectangle piece of wood that's the length of the saw blade and cut it about half its width. Next, we want to cut out two notches that are the same width as the bolts we'll be using to attach the depth stop to the saw. It's easier if we drill holes first and then saw out the remainder of the notch. A little bit of sanding wouldn't hurt either. Place the wood onto the saw blade and then make two marks in each notch, the higher the better. Using a center punch, we can make sure our drill stays lined up. Drill the holes into the saw blade. Slide one bolt into each hole, then place our depth stop, and lastly add a washer and a wing nut to each bolt. Now we can adjust our depth stop to the height that we need. It seems like this clothespin is unable to pick up this nut, but we can make a little adjustment to turn the clothespin into a handy pair of tweezers. Remove the spring and flip the sticks inside out. Reattach the spring, and now our tweezers can pick up all sorts of little things. Here's a fun little party trick using matches and a syringe. First, take the syringe apart. Dispose of the needle properly. Take a box of matches and cut out the rough side of the matchbox. Roll the cutout around the tip of a match. Next, we'll wrap it multiple times using tape. It matches the width of the inside of the syringe. Place the match and the tape inside the syringe. Now, just slam the plunger down onto the table to ignite the match. Here we have a piece of ribbon that's cut. Instead of gluing it, we can tie it together using a simple overhand knot. Pass the second piece of ribbon around the knot like so. For our last project, we'll be making an adjustable wrench by welding together a few nuts and bolts. First, we'll secure a square tube in our vise and then weld a nut onto the end. We can grind down some of the rough edges using an angle grinder. Next, we'll put 2 nuts onto an extra long bolt, spaced about 2 inches apart. Secure one of the nuts near the end of the square tube with a clamp, and then weld both nuts onto the square tube. Now we need to make a fixed jaw, also known as the top of the clamp. To do that, we'll cut off a piece of scrap metal in the shape of an L. Now we'll weld this piece. Again, we'll grind off some of the rough edges with an angle grinder. Now we can use it just like a normal wrench when you don't happen to have the exact size wrench or socket for the job. Just twist the bolts according to the size that you need. It can even be used for abnormal shaped objects.
Let's move on to work with the wires. First thing to do is strip them. To do this with our own hands, we will create a simple construction, which is suitable for cables of different thickness. Let's cover it with varnish and install a blade from an ordinary box cutter. Well, there, the mount is solid. You can check it out in action. As you can see, everything works great. Now let's fix the wires to the wall. It's often unreliable, but we know how to fix it. Just 2 parts. You cannot pull the plug out of the outlet. I don't understand why no one follows this simple rule. Well, let's make a sturdy attachment that will keep the cable from ripping off once again. And move on to the corrugated pipe. It's not hard to fasten it properly too. And it's a totally different thing. It's time to find out how the 3-way switch works. Trust me, it's a very handy thing that lets you control lights from different parts of the room. The important thing is to build the right circuit. Does it look like the outlet's about to fall off? That's not good. We need to fix it right away. Let's take it apart and make it as sturdy as possible. We'll have to use a gun to do it. No, not the one that you're thinking of, just a glue gun. Put the parts back in place. it's held firmly in place. Did the light bulb stop working? Maybe it's a blown diode. Let's take it apart and see. We suggest shorting it out. Grab your soldering iron, it's time to get started. And test it. It works. Burnt and shorted. These words often haunt electricians. Fortunately, professionals know how to prevent the problem. For example, you can connect the wires beforehand using this simple principle of stairs. Perfect! All that's left is to connect and insulate everything. This construction is not as sturdy as it looks. Maybe we could add some fire. I think it will help secure everything. However, why assume when you cannot test it? The final touch is that now all the wires are definitely protected. Junctions are the worst dream of anyone who has ever dealt with electrical work. They are so often unreliable. You need to fix the situation. Take note of a few successful and proven tricks. Really solid too. Check out a few more options. You will have to use pliers for these. This is even tighter than the sealant knot. A whole roll of duct tape can be difficult to slip through the small gaps between the wires. And finally, let's make an express phone charger, which will come in handy in case you don't have a regular one at hand.